Hey everybody, welcome back to Scoop Phase. We have an interesting deck here. We have Weather Painters, yay! So if you don't know what these are, I don't blame you. They're a little weird. They're an archetype of fairy monsters, and they all do stuff with continuous spells and traps, and they're column based. So they all have an effect where where during the standby phase, if they were banished to activate the weather effect, they come back. Then they all have different effects. Like this guy has an effect to send a continuous spell or trap, to place one, a weather spell and trap. This one, when it's normal summoned, it places one. So what the weather things, these are the canvases and stuff. What they do is they give an effect to the weather monster that's in the column in front of it, or the two columns next to that column. So it makes like a T. And so they all get this effect, and their effect becomes whatever effect these spells and traps grant. So, and they banish themselves to do this, and then they come back during the next standby phase. So what actually ends up happening is a lot of times you're bouncing these things in and out a whole bunch. So you can play around things like skill drain because you banish for cost, so your effects still resolve. So what this made me think to do this deck is I was trying to think of something that this card is at least decent in. This is Underdog. It just came out in Blazing Vortex. I personally don't think it's that great, but it's actually okay in this deck because it kind of gives us more copies of skill drain, and these things can play around it on our opponent's turn. It doesn't really matter. We're tagging out anyways. And then on our turn, it negates it skills drains all their monsters, which helps because we have a hard time going into established negates and stuff. So this can sometimes help. Is this the best card in here? No, by any means it is not. But I figured it was worth a try, and it seemed at least a little decent in this deck. So we'll go over this real quick. I'll go over all the weather stuff first, and then we'll get to the more other stuff that isn't exactly the weather. So we have Weather Painter Aurora, Aurora. Excuse me if I get the names wrong. They're all fairies. They're all level 3 except her. She's level 6. So when she's normal summoned, you get to place the weather spell and trap from your hand, deck, or graveyard face up in your spell and trap card zone. That's kind of cool. You're never gonna you're probably never tribute summoning this, but it can come up sometimes. And then the most important thing is your opponent cannot target the weather spell and trap cards you control with card effects, and they can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects while she's face up. And then her last effect is once per turn during the standby phase, after this card was banished from the field to activate the weather card effect, special summon this banished card. So all the weather monsters have that last effect. So I'm not going to read it again. This is the only time I'm going to read it. But she's really good as a one-of because there is a way to special summon her out of the deck. And she just helps it so you can't get Harpy's Feather Dustered or anything, because your spells and traps are really what is making this deck work. Unfortunately, she only protects the weather spell and trap, so she doesn't protect the other more generic stuff, but it's still pretty decent. And next, we probably have the second best, the weather monster. You'll also notice a lot of these monsters aren't actually that good. There's two really good ones, and then there's level 6, which is good, but it's level 6, and then the other ones are just kind of eh. But we have the Weather Painter Thunder, so he has the same effect as they all do when he banishes. He comes back. So you can send one continuous spell or trap you control to the graveyard to place the weather spell and trap from your deck. It's directly into your spell and trap card zone. So the cool thing about this is if you have, say, Imperial Order up and you want to shut it off on your turn to get one of your, say, the spell, he sends for cost, which is really nice. So like stuff like skill drain, he can just send the skill drain and just turn it off, or the underdog, something like that. And he just gets you whichever one you want, and it places them, it doesn't activate. So things like anti-spell, you can actually have anti-spell up and still place your spells in the spell and trap card zone without having to set them first, which is actually very nice. So that's his effect. He's also I think he's the biggest, level 3. Yeah, it's 1700, so that actually sometimes comes up. Next we have the Weather Painter Sun. I only play one of him. His effect is not really that great. He has the same effect, of course, where he comes back. So if he's in your graveyard, which, unless you're losing, this is usually not happening. So if he's in your graveyard, you can send one face-up continuous spell and trap card you control to the graveyard to special summon him in defense. And then if you do, place one The Weather spell and trap from your hand in the spell and trap card zone. So he has to be in the graveyard, and you have to have a The Weather card spell and trap in your hand to get this revival effect. He's really good if you've made the Link monster, which doesn't actually happen that often. And if you're making the Link monster, you're probably winning anyways. But that's kind of nice. That's why he's only a 1 of in here. You do need a certain amount of these things, because sometimes you'll open the spells and traps, but no monsters, and then it just doesn't do anything, which is one of the biggest weaknesses of this deck, is the monsters don't really do that much on their own, most of them. And the spells and traps don't really do anything on their own. You need them both together. Anyway, so we have just 1 of him. He's not that great to start with. He's actually really horrible to start with if you have no spells and traps. Next one we have the Weather Painter Cloud. So his effect is if another face-up The Weather card is sent to the graveyard, you can target up to 2 of your The Weather spell and trap cards in your graveyard, and then place them in the spell and trap card zone. So what's really cool is if he's already on field and you use Thunder to send one that you don't need anymore to get one out of the deck, he'll trigger and get back the one you just sent, which is really, really nice. It works same way if one of your monsters is sent too, so that's also really nice. So he's a good way to recover your spells and traps. And if you don't have her up, and they say they Harpy's Feather Duster your back row, he'll get back 2 of those, which is really nice. But once again, he's kind of not really that great on his own, so we're not playing a full 3 of him. And then the last Weather main deck monster we have here is probably the best one, the Weather Painter Snow. She has 0 attack but 2200 defense, which is actually very nice. So when you banish these things and they come back, it counts as a special summon. So you can pick which position they're in, attack or defense. So a lot of times you'll use her effect and then just bring her back in defense. So having a normal summon her with 0 attack isn't really that big of an issue. So when she's normal summoned, you can place 1 The Weather spell and trap from your deck face up in your spell and trap card zone. This can't be ashed, which is really nice. So it's not adding anything, it's just placing. So the only way to really stop this is like Imperm or Effect Veiler, which is really nice. And you normal summon her, you get usually the spell, because the spell does search, and then you just kind of go from there. So she's really the best one, because you can open her and none of their spells and traps and still technically do something, which the other ones aren't always guaranteed to do that. So that's it for the Weather monsters. The only other monsters we have 3 Ash Blossom and 2 Ghost Spell. You can kind of change this however you would want. The Ghost Spells could be Effect Veilers or Ghost Ogres or Imperms or whatever you want. I just think this is good. You don't have that much room to play hand traps, but I think it's important to play a few hand traps. As you can see, this is actually a pretty trap-heavy deck, so going second's a little hard sometimes, so it's nice to have these. Next, we have Pot of Prosperity. You could play, as I have it down here in the side deck as an option, you could play Extravagance instead. It really doesn't matter. It's nice, though, to have this, and if you say you have a Weather Painter monster, but you don't have one of their spells and traps, being able to dig for 6 cards to try and get it is really nice. And being able to dig for 6 cards and maybe find a Skill Drain or an Imperial Order or a Macrocosmos or a Judgment is all very, very good. So and then battle damage in this deck doesn't matter, so that part doesn't really matter. So yeah, you can play this or Extravagance. Really, it's up to you. I kind of want to try this out since we're doing Blazing Vortex cards, but I think this might be the better option here. Then we start to get our continuous spells. So we have Valhalla Hall of the Fallen, which is actually really good with him. So what its effect is once per turn you can special summon 1 fairy monster from your hand. You must control no monsters to activate and resolve this. So the cool thing is if you have her in your hand, this can actually special summon her, because it doesn't specify level. So that's nice. The other thing that's cool is if you have Valhalla and Thunder, you can special Thunder with Valhalla, and then Thunder can send the Valhalla to get the Canvas, which you'll see in a little bit later, and Canvas lets you search another thing, which could be a snow, and then you all of a sudden now have 2 Weather Painters in play with 2 different spells and traps, which is really nice. So Valhalla is really good. You don't want to run too many of it, because a lot of these cards don't do much on their own, and it really sucks to draw this card with no monsters, so you don't really want to run 3 of it. It's actually not once per turn, so the fact that these things tag out is actually very nice if you do draw multiples of these. But yeah, that's Valhalla. And then next we have our slew of Weather Painter continuous spells. So we have the Rainy Canvas. So they all have this effect where the weather effect monsters in your main monster zone of this card's column and its adjacent columns gain this effect. And then you can only control one, the Rainy Canvas. So they all only let you control one of them, and they all give that kind of T effect to the monsters. So it's actually it's still the monster effects going off. It's not the spells doing an effect. The spells are just are continuously giving the monsters an effect. But what this one does is you can banish this card, so one of your weather monsters, and target one spell and trap your opponent controls, quick effect, return it to the hand. So this card is a really nice one-of. It pairs really well with anti-spell. This is not once per turn, so if you have 3 weather painters in front of this, you can bounce 3 spells and traps. So like you can go end phase, say you're facing Eldritch and they set like 4 back row, you can bounce like 3 of it immediately, which is really nice. So that's why this is a good one-of, and it's really easy to get to with Thunder and Snow and even Aurora, and then the card we're going to get to in a second. So that's why we have this in here. It's a good one-of. You could play more if you want, but I don't think there's really a point because you can search it whenever you want, and you can get it back pretty easily with a lot of these cards. The next one-of is we have Cloudy Canvas. This is arguably the worst canvas. There's a trap that I don't have in here that's also not that great. It's down here in the side deck. It's kind of a toss-up between these two, which one's the worst. So what you can do with this is it has the same thing. You can banish this card, then target one face-up monster on the field. Quick effect, have its current attack for the rest of this turn, but it can attack directly. So the cool thing is you can use this either offensively or defensively. So defensively, you can use this to tag your guys out to save them from something, and also have the attack of an opponent's monster. So if it looks like they have a big attack monster, you can have it. You can also use this offensively. If you really needed to go for a certain amount of direct attack damage, you can. We put Zeus in here because we have Nightmare Shark. You can technically do that to attack directly, I guess. But mainly it's here just because it's really good to have an effect that you can just tag out. So if you have 2 weather painters, you can chain one of them to tag out to target the other one to protect it. Or if your opponent has a monster, you can just tag them both out. So say they activate like Torrential, say they normal summon something and chain their own Torrential Tribute, you can use this effect to get both your weather painters out of there, and then just target the same monster twice, and then there you go. That's the only reason it's in here. It's a one-of. We can search it whenever we want. It really sucks to open it, but yeah, you could cut it if you really want to. You just have to have a certain amount of names, because like if you open this plus Thunder, you can just have Thunder send this. It doesn't really make a big difference. And then last we have arguably the best canvas. We have the Weather Snowy Canvas. So same effect as the other ones, but the effect it grants to the weather monsters is you can banish this card, quick effect, add 1 the weather card from your deck to your hand. Also, you cannot add cards from your deck to your hand for the rest of this turn except by drawing them. So what this does is it lets you tag out and search for a card. Funny enough, you can actually tag multiple weathers out in the same chain with this effect. You just will only get 1 search. So if you really need to have a bunch of them dodge something, you can technically chain them all in the same chain to get them out of there. Be careful, I did this in my testing. I chained this to the Disparity thinking, oh, I'll add something off Disparities to increase my chances of Prosperity giving me something good. And then the Prosperity just resolves with no effect. So be careful with that because you can't add cards after you do this effect. But it's also really nice if you open this plus Snow, you can activate this, normal Snow, and if they try and imperm it or something, you can just have Snow tag out, search something, and she'll still get her setting effect. So that's really nice. This is the best one. This is usually what you're trying to go for with Snow or with Thunder. And yeah, and it can search any of these. It can search any of the monsters, which is really nice. So it's just a very, very good card. That's why we're playing 3 of it. We want to see this. We don't want to have to search this if we don't have to. And the last spell we're playing is we're just playing 1-Dimensional Fissure. It's actually very hard for our opponent to kill these things because they can just kind of get out of danger really easily. So they're usually not going to the graveyard, so the Dimension Fissure doesn't really hurt us that much, whereas it can really hurt our opponent. And if we wanted to start Link summoning or something, we can always have Thunder just send this to get rid of it. So it's just a good one-of. And also, if we really desperately needed to, it's something we can activate and have Thunder send to search something. So yeah, that's it for the spells. Next we're on to the traps. We have a lot of continuous traps here. We have Underdog. I mentioned it earlier, so I don't think I read its effects though. But so during your turn, negate the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent controls, and during your opponent's turn, negate the effects of all face-up monsters you control. Your opponent's turn part doesn't matter because these things banish for cost, so they'll still get their effects because they will no longer be on field when resolving their effects. And then during your turn, if your opponent's stuff's negated, that helps you kind of out some stuff, which we'll see in a second. Like I said before, though, you could definitely play something better than this. I just wanted to try Underdog. So we just have two of that. I feel like it's like two more. It's like two more skill drain, kind of. Not as good though. Next we have three of the Thundery Canvas. So this is probably this. You could argue this is almost as good as this one. So what its effect is at the start of the damage step, if this card battles an opponent's monster, so whichever weather it's giving its effect to, you can banish this card, and then return that monster to your opponent's hand. This is not once per turn. So once again, none of these are once per turn really. So if you have 3 weather monsters in the right zones for this, you can bounce 3 monsters. So that's where Underdog really comes in play, because if they have a bunch of scary things, but they're all under skill drain essentially because of Underdog, and then you just go bounce them all, it's very helpful. This doesn't matter whether you're attacking or if they're attacking you, you get to do this. So it's really, really, really good. You usually want to have this, and then this trap, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, and you can get it back real easily. It's just a very good card. You could play Kaijus. We have Kaijus in the side deck. It's very funny to bounce your own Kaiju back. I didn't think it was worth main decking it, but you could. Next, we have a bunch of one-ups. We have Macrocosmos. Kind of the same reason for the Dimensional Fissure. The only problem with this one is we can't really turn it off ourselves, because Thunder has to send the grave for cost, and you can't send the macro to grave for cost because it would get banished. So that's the only issue. We don't really want to use this unless we absolutely need to, but it's a good thing to have in there. Same with Imperial Order. This one's a little iffy too, because if you negate these effects, none of your spells are giving effect. But to be fair, the Snowy Canvas is really the only continuous spell you'd really be upset with being negated. And you can always, you can turn off with Thunder if you really needed to. And I just felt like we needed ways to out Mystic Mine, which is why we have this, and which is why we have one Unending Nightmare in here. You can pay 1,000 life points, target one face-up spell and trap on the field, destroy it. We could use this to out our own macro if we really wanted to, or to clear up zones. But it's mainly there to just, if there's a Mystic Mine, just get it out of here. Any kind of continuous spell and trap we don't like, just get it out of here. So that's mainly what these two are for. And then we have the last weather card in the main deck. It's the Rainbowed Canvas. This one is also very good. So it has the effect where if your opponent controls a monster, you can banish this card, special summon one weather monster with a different name from your deck, and then also you can out special summon other monsters from the deck for the rest of the turn. So it's kind of like the Snow Canvas, where you can chain a bunch of them on the same chain, but only one of them is going to resolve, but you can use it to get them out of danger. This is why we're playing one Aurora, basically. Because on our opponent's turn, we can just immediately tag one of these out once they get a monster on field to get Aurora out, which is really nice. And then now Aurora's in play, and you can use Aurora's effect with something else to search or bounce or whatever, and then Aurora will keep coming back, so that's really nice. So this just lets you pick and choose which weather you want. And the way this works basically is, so you banish, say, Snow to summon a Thunder. So if all goes well, the Snow's coming back next turn, so you have 2 weathers now, which is really, really nice, but instead of just the one you had. So then at that point, if you have, say, Sun, you can normal him and actually make the Link 3. Ever since this card came out, because this card came out later than the original support, ever since this card came out, I have made this Link 3 way more than when this card didn't exist. So it really helps in that regard. But it's not as powerful as the others, because it's a little conditional, and it doesn't really do anything to mess with your opponent. So we only play 2 of it. It's really easy to get to, as you could see from the rest of this deck. Last, we have 1 skill drain, because it's skill drain, and we don't care at all about the skill drain effect, because we can just tag out and basically dodge the skill drain, which is really nice. And then we have 3 judgment, because even though we technically have ways to counter a lightning storm or a Harpy's Feather Duster, it's still nice to have this card. So that's it for the main deck. I'm going to go over the extra deck really quick because it doesn't matter. We have 3 Nightmares. They're just there. We have Access Code. I don't think we'll ever make him, but he's here. Same with the 2 Boral. We have Boral Load, Boral Sword, whatever. We have the, if we face Dogmatica, we have the Mechaba Nova Intis thing with Omega, which is really nice. And then these are all level 3, so you, in theory, could make Nightmare Shark, use Nightmare Shark's effect, make him attack directly, and then make Zeus. So, why not? Usually when I use Prosperity for 6, I usually get rid of, if I don't think I'm facing Dogmatica, I'll get rid of Mechaba, Nova, 1 of the Borals, 2 of the Weather Monster, and then Cerberus. Because really the only extract monster that really matters is the Weather Monster, and even then you're probably only ever going to make 1 of her anyways. So I should probably go over her effect. So she takes 3 Weather Monsters. Exactly 3. This is why she's a little hard to make. She's really good though. I wish she wasn't this hard to make. When your opponent would special summon a monster or monster's quick effect, you can send this link summon card to the graveyard to negate the summon, and if you do, destroy those monsters. So she's a judgment. You have to get rid of her, which kind of sucks if you get to the next effect, but that's really, really good. The other effect is she has the same thing that the Canvases does, where her zones that she points to, she grants an effect to weather monsters that are down there. So basically, you can banish a weather monster that's on one of her zones to activate this effect. When a card, or to activate, to become this effect, it's not really her activating it, it's the weather monster's effect becoming that. When a card or effect is activated, quick effect, you can banish this card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. So she turns all your little weather painters into omni-negates that are not once per turn. So, and she, if in an emergency, can judgment a summon. Or solemn warning a summon, however you want to look at it. So she's really good. She's really hard to make though, so you're definitely not making her turn 1. This is usually a snowball effect when you get to her. She usually just locks the game up, which is why most of these other Link monsters don't actually matter. So yeah, that's the extra deck. I'm just gonna real quickly go over the side here. These are all just things you could play. You definitely could make an argument for it. The one I think's the funniest is the Kaijus. So you can Kaiju your opponent. Also, the cool thing I forgot to mention is Snow and Thunder. They place them, so you can place this trap face up from your deck. So it's ready to go right away. So going second, you could Kaiju normal Snow, get this attack, bounce the Kaiju back, then Kaiju again, which is pretty nice. That's why you could play Kaijus, or at least side deck Kaijus. It's definitely a thing to think about. You could probably just throw 3 Red Eyes Fusion in here, kind of like Guru and all those other decks do. Because you don't really need to do a weather thing right away if you have a Dragoon sitting there. The same theory kind of goes with, you could play Numeron Network. You could just sit on a Utopic Future, whatever his name is, and just stall it out and then get your Weather Painter stuff. And then I already went over Extravagance. That would be more of a replacement for Prosperity. You could, in theory, play Duality. I just hate Duality with this deck, because if you have to use it like later in the game and you had to bring one of these back, it counts as a special summon. So then either you don't bring them back so you can use the Duality, or you bring them back and the Duality is now a dead card in your hand. So it's really good like going first, because you're really not special summoning unless you have Valhalla. But the later it goes in the game, this card starts to get a lot worse if your deck's actually working. Another thing you could play is Droplets, or just kind of any generic go second thing, because this deck does kind of struggle going second. Also, another continuous spell you could play is Degenerate Circuit. So each of your standby phases you pay 500 life points. But what this effect is, monsters that return from the field to the hand are banished instead. So it works really well with this trap. I just don't think it was really worth it. I think returning them to the hand's probably good enough anyways, but you could play this, it'd be funny. And then traps, you could play Drowning Mirror. I used to play Drowning Mirror Force in this deck. You could very easily play this, because you can get all your guys off the field, and then if they attack directly, this shuffles them all back into the deck, which is nice. I don't really think Mirror Forces are that good right now, but this is probably the best one, and you can definitely play this one. And then there's just a bunch of other continuous traps. You could play Summon Limit It'd be a little tricky because all the weather painters coming back kind of special summons, but you could probably figure it out. Mask of Restrict, if you don't want to deal with Drytron or True Draco or something like that, you can play this. And then if you, for whatever reason, needed to turn it off to tribute summon your Aurora, you technically can. You can play Crackdown. It's a continuous trap. It's a little weird though, because usually you want continuous spells and traps in here because they synergize really well with Thunder. The problem though with like Crackdown is if Thunder sends it to get something, they'll get their monster back. So it's a little weird in that. You could play it though. This is the other weather canvas that I thought about. Basically, when your opponent adds a card to their hand, you can banish a weather monster, and then that player banishes the card they added and then draws a card. So, like, if they specifically search for something, you can do this, but I don't even think it's that worth it, so it's not. I don't think it's that great. Like I said earlier, you can play anti-spell in this deck, because you can play around it because you place stuff, you don't activate, and if you needed to activate, you can always turn this off with Thunder. And it works really well with this thing, the Rainy Canvas, so if they have to sell their spells and you keep bouncing all their spells back to their hand in the end phase, they just never get to activate spells, which is really nice. You could play Mistake. The only thing that Mistake messes with you on your end is the Snowy Canvas, but I don't think that's that big of a deal. And like I've said with all these other things, Thunder can turn it off whenever you want. And then the only real floodgatey, like, rivalry, there can only be one Gozen match one that you can play is Rivalry. You can't play Gozen, because they're all level 3 fairies, but they're all different attributes. So you can't really get away with that. And you can't really play There Can Be Only One, because they're all fairies. But you can play Rivalry, because they're all fairies. So if Rivalry ends up being really good in a format, you can definitely throw this in there, or at least side deck it. So yeah, that is the weather deck, the art. I like to call it the art deck because they're painters and stuff. I'd show you a combo or test hands, but there's not that much you can do with it. I mean, I could show you the Valhalla thing, but it's kind of straightforward. But yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the deck profile and me just talking forever about this. I actually really like this deck. I don't know why, but I do. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy seeing this in action when it's in the next Scoop Phase episode. Hopefully it does okay. Maybe. Hopefully we don't just run into a bunch of Dragoon Turbos. Although to be fair, this doesn't target, so if we can bait the Dragoon negate, this can get rid of a Dragoon. So this deck can out a Dragoon. That's important. Alright, if you liked the video, like it. Comment down below which weather painter is your favorite. There's one we missed. Where is she? This one, it's not that great. You can if this card is special summon, you place weather, spell, and trap from your hand into the spell and trap card zone. That's it. I didn't think she was that great. But yeah, anyways, comment which weather painter is your favorite, even if it's rain, that's okay. And then subscribe if you like the video and want to see more. And I'll see you in the next Scoop Phase episode. Goodbye.